In this demo, I want to talk about how to make a large file a little smaller. So this is specific to this type of file here, where you have the same object that is copied multiple times. And so this is a very nice file, and so let's talk about this file first, and then we'll talk about how we can make it a little smaller in size. So you can see here you've got the same rubber duck. And what's really interesting about this file, and I think what this student did really well, was creating two versions of them, having one that has an X underneath and one that does not. And so what's really cool about it is, you would grab it and you would make a group, and you would be able to fish it out and check if the duck has an X or not. So I thought that was really amazing. This is really nice work. But for this one, we end up with a file that is 120 megabytes. So I wanted to talk about how we can reduce the file size and keep the same amount of information and still have basically the same scene, the same model. So this is pretty cool. You could make a group like I just did here, and so you would make two groups. But if you look at the size, even if you group everything, you would have a file that's still 120 megabytes. So how do we reduce the file size? Well, if you go under Edit, right next to the group command, you have blocks. So I would suggest that you do both a group and blocks. So I would select your grouped object and then go under Edit, Blocks, or you can type in block. And what you're doing here is you're creating an instance. So an instance is basically taking the same model and making a copy of it without duplicating, without recreating a second set of geometry. Because every time you copy the geometry, you can modify it individually, and that makes it very heavy. But when you make an instance, it's basically a visual copy of the original version. So it makes the file a lot smaller in this case because it's the same object multiple times. So I think here the option we would use would be insert or create. It's probably this one here, create a block definition. Yeah, that's the one, the block command. And so if you don't have anything selected, it will prompt you to select the object or the surface. So in this case, we have selected the object and it's asking us to define the block base point. So I would suggest picking a point on the object, like the endpoint here, which is around the center of the object. And here you have the option to name the block, which is basically an instance. It's called a block for some reason. I'm not sure why the instance is called a block, but so if you go here, it tells you your object property. Your object is what type? The type is a block instance. So it's basically a copy. And so by itself here, you really haven't done anything. You just selected the object and told the software that you're using an instance. But once you copy this object, it will say the same thing, except this is an instance now. And so if you replaced all of the dogs that do not have an X, and then you create another one with all of the dogs, let me do a group, let me do another block, and we'll pick the same point here, the endpoint, block 2. So now we have two blocks, and we can copy them, and you'll see that the file that is 120 megabytes will be a lot lighter. So I've already spent the time and I did that. So let me show you the result. Here you have a file, it's 18 megabytes. So yeah, it's a lot smaller. And if I open this file, you will see it's exactly the same file, the same information. Let's render it so it looks the same. It's going to take some time, but yeah, here it is, pretty much the same. Not sure why there's two copies here. Okay, let's hide one of them and delete this, and then we can show the object that I had hidden. Yeah, so here you can see these are a bunch of groups. The file is a lot smaller. It's around 18 megabytes. And one cool thing about block is you can go to the block manager. So if we go under blocks, there's this thing called block manager. And in here you can see block 01, block 02, and you can also select them. And it will tell you you have a total of 5 objects. And so right now they are selected. And let's see if I close this. Yeah, so it can select all of the blocks that have an X on it. I'm not sure why you would want that, but the point is, if you had a very complicated scene like this one and you have the same object and you have it multiple times, by creating this block instance, you can make the file a lot smaller, which is really nice. Now, if for some reason the file is still too large, like let's say you have a car or like some kind of vehicle, like a motorcycle, and the wheels are very complex, and so each of the wheels is like 100 megabytes. Well, you make an instance of one of your wheel, and now it's half as large for the wheels. So that's one of the reasons why you would do that. Now for this file, it's kind of it's a cheat because you could select all of the docs that have an X, and you wouldn't have to go in and select them and move them up and rotate them to see the X to check if you selected a doc that has an X or not. But so I think you get the point, you get the idea. So this is a pretty powerful tool to take a large file and be able to make it a smaller file. Now, if for some reason it's still too large, as a last alternative, what you can do is when you save out your file, you can do File, Save As, and here you can change the settings here and say Save Small, Save the Geometry Only. So if you save the geometry only, you might actually lose some of the images, the textures that are applied. It really depends on how your file is set up. But typically, if you save small, save geometry, and save the textures, you should have a much lighter file. So let's see how much smaller we can get it. But so basically, all you would be doing here is removing some of the mesh data. So in this case, there's not that much mesh data that we would need. So let's do that. Let's just save it this way. And the only downside to doing that is that when you save small, when you save the geometry only, what tends to happen is, oh, here it is, 1 megabyte. So this is what it would look like if you opened it. So we reduce the file size by a lot, but the one downside is if you want to render, now it's going to have to create the mesh information for creating the rendering of a display. So it might take some time as you shade the model or as you create a render preview. So if we go under the rendered display mode, it might take longer. Now, this was really fast because some of these objects are simple and because we also have the instance. So creating an instance, a block instance, can really speed up the rendering process, the way that it creates the preview. Yeah, so that's why I wanted to go over this topic. This is something I had not talked about in previous videos, and I figured this would be interesting.